All right, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to Fix Your Gut live stream. I'm your host, John Brisson. Going to read a few health articles for you this evening, discuss them. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Exhaustion linked with increased risk of heart attack in men. Men experiencing vital exhaustion are more likely to have a heart attack, according to research presented today at ESC Acute Cardiovascular Care 2021, an online scientific congress of the European Society of Cardiology. The risk of myocardial infarction linked with exhaustion was particularly pronounced in never married, divorced, and widowed men. Yeah, there are studies that show that having a partner, for better or for worse, does reduce your chances of having a cardiovascular or cerebrovascular effect, both males and females. Vital exhaustion refers to excessive fatigue, feelings of demoralization, and increased irritability, says study author Dr. Dmitry Panov of the Institute of Cytology and Genetics, Novosibirsk, Russian Federation. It's also thought to be a response to the intractable problems in people's lives, particularly when they're unable to adapt to prolonged exposure to psychological stressors. The study examined the relationship between vital exhaustion and the risk of myocardial infarction with no history of cardiovascular disease. The study used data from the World Health Organization Monica Project. A representative sample of the 657 men aged 25 to 64 years in Novosibirsk was enrolled in 1994. Now, it's actually a condition. I'm going to get the actual medical term for it. It's called broken heart syndrome. The name for it is Japanese. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. So you can actually die from a broken heart. And a lot's going to have to do with the amount of oxidative stress comes from severe cortisol spikes, from being severely depressed, and lack of sleep too as well, and probably lack of proper diet and lack of motion and just a lack of will to live can actually kill somebody. It will lead to your heart becoming weak, you dealing with heart failure, and you dying through literally broken heart syndrome. So yeah, stress does, when you're put in a bleak situation or believe that you're in a bleak situation, and it'll end up causing your heart to literally fail. I mean, the left ventricle takes on a different shape. So yeah. It's crazy what cortisol and stress will do to the human body. Symptoms of vital exhaustion were assessed at baseline using the Maastricht Vital Exhaustion Questionnaire adopted by the Monica Protocol. Participants were classified according to the level of vital exhaustion: none, moderate, or high. Participants were followed up for 14 years for the incidence of a heart attack. Overall, 2/3, 67% of the men had vital exhaustion, 15% had high level, and 52% had a moderate level, while 33% were unaffected. Nearly three-quarters, 74% of men with high blood pressure had vital exhaustion, high in 58% and moderate in 16%. In the overall group of men, the researchers analyzed the association between vital exhaustion at baseline and the risk of having a heart attack. Compared to those without vital exhaustion, men with moderate or high levels had a 2.7-fold greater risk of a heart attack within 5 years, a 2.25 higher risk within 10 years, and a 2.1 raised risk within 14 years, peak for all less than 0.5. With the analysis was controlled for social factors. Hey, Eric, how you doing? Education, occupation, and marital status, and age, the influence of vital exhaustion on heart attack risk decrease remains statistically significant. For example, compared to those without vital exhaustion, men with moderate or high levels were 16% more likely to have a myocardial infarction over 14 years of follow-up compared to those without, after adjusting for social factors and age, p less than 0.05. In the adjusted analysis, the risk of heart attack linked with exhaustion was higher in never married, divorced, and widowed men compared to married men, with hazard ratios of 3.7, 4.7, 7.0, respectively. The risk of heart attack related to exhaustion was 2.2-fold higher in those with the elementary school education compared to men with a university degree. Middle-aged men were more affected than younger men compared to 24 to 34-year-olds. The risk of a heart attack connected with exhaustion was 3.8-fold higher in 45 to 55-year-olds and in 5.9-fold higher in 55 to 64-year-olds. Regarding the influence of marital status and the relationship between exhaustion and heart heart attack, Dr. Panoff said living alone indicates less social support, which we know from our prior studies is an independent risk factor for myocardial infarction and stroke. Yep, like I mentioned earlier. You know that findings indicate a pattern whereby social disadvantage relates to vital exhaustion, which is associated with a greater risk of heart disease. The relationship of exhaustion with threatening cardiovascular events should be taken into account when assessing risk, he said. Dr. Panoff concluded, efforts to improve well-being and reduce stress at home and work can help reduce vital exhaustion. Involvement in community groups is one way to increase social support and becoming less vulnerable to stress. Together with a healthy lifestyle, these measures should be beneficial for heart health. So yeah, going out and socializing, talking with friends regularly, getting pets, finding someone to date that hopefully later on leads to marriage, all of those things. If you're looking at reducing stress, grounding, getting proper sunlight, prayer, Epsom salt baths, self-reflection, trauma release exercise. I mean, there's multiple things that can be done. Studies suggest role of sleep in healing traumatic brain injuries. Sound sleep plays a critical role in healing traumatic brain injury. A new study of military veterans suggests. The study, published in the Journal of Neurotrauma, used a new technique involving magnetic resonant imaging developed at Oregon Health and Science University. Researchers used MRI to evaluate the enlargement of paravascular spaces that surround blood vessels in the brain. Enlargement of these spaces occurs in aging associated with the development of dementia. Among veterans in the study, those who slept poorly had more evidence of the enlarged spaces and more post-concussive symptoms. This has huge implications for the armed forces as well as civilians, said the lead author, Juan Paintino, medical doctor, MCR assistant, professor of pediatrics neurology in the OHSU School of Medicine and Dorenbecker Children's Hospital. The study suggests sleep may play an independent role in clearing waste from the brain after traumatic brain injury. Yep, I mentioned that when I discussed some research earlier on concussions. And if you don't sleep well, you might not clean your brain as efficiently. Pantino, a physician scientist with OHSU's Papi Family Pediatric Research Institute, studies the effects of poor sleep on recovery after traumatic brain injuries. The new study benefits from a method of analyzing MRIs developed by study co-author Daniel Schwartz and Aaron Boseplug, PhD, under the direction of Lisa Silbert, MD, MCR professor of neurology in the OHSU School of Medicine. The technique measures changes in the brain's paravascular spaces, which are parts of the brain's waste clearance system known as the glymphatic system. We're able to very precisely measure the structure and count the number, location, and diameter of channels, Piantino said. Co-author Jeffrey Lilith, PhD, a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences and of neurology at the University of Washington, a researcher at the VA Puget Sound Healthcare System, has led scientific research in the glymphatic system and his role in neurodegenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's disease. During sleep, this brain-wide network clears away metabolic proteins that would otherwise build up in the brain. The study used data collected from a group of 56 veterans enrolled by co-authors Ellen Peskind, MD, and Murray Raskind, MD, at the Mental Illness Research and Education and Clinical Center at the VA Puget Sound between 2011 and 2019. Imagine your brain is generating all this waste and everything is working fine, Pantino said. Now you get a concussion, the brain generates much more waste that it has to remove, but the system becomes plugged. Pantino says that the new study suggests a technique developed by Silbert can be useful for older adults. Longer term, we can start thinking about using this method to predict what is going to be a higher risk for cognitive problems, including dementia, he said. The study is the latest in the growing body of research highlighting the importance of sleep and brain health. Improving sleep is a modifiable habit that can be improved through a variety of methods, Pantino said, including better sleep hygiene, habits such as reducing screen time before bed. Improving sleep is a focus of research of other OHSU scientists, including Pantino's mentor, Miranda Lim, MD, PhD, Associate Professor of Neurology, Medicine, and Behavioral Neurosciences in the OHSU School of Medicine. The study puts sleep at the epicenter of recovery in traumatic brain injury, Pantino said. The study was supported by the National Heart and Lung Institute and National Institute of Health. So yeah, proper sleep hygiene, reducing your blue light exposure at night the best you can. Some people wear blue light blocking glasses hours before bed when it gets dark outside. There are certain blue filters that you can install on your computer and phone, like Twilight and Flux. Sleeping in total darkness, making sure your bedroom is cool, around 70 degrees, 68 to 70 degrees. Mattresses and pillows matter. You want to make sure that your pillows are, you have proper support of your neck. Don't ever sleep on your stomach if all possible, because you reduce the amount of oxygen that you can get, and you increase abdominal pressure that can lead to reflux, and it's easier to have sleep apnea on your stomach. So you want to sleep on your left or right side, preferably your back if necessary, to improve sleep. There's many different things that you can do to improve sleep hygiene. I have a blog on Fix Your Gut about melatonin. Release of serotonin from mast cells contribute to airway hyperresponsiveness in asthma. In asthma, the airways become hyperresponsive. Researchers from Uppsala University have found a new mechanism that contributes to and explains airway hyperresponsiveness. The results are published in the scientific journal Allergy. Some 10% of Sweden's population suffer from asthma. In asthmatics, the airways are hyperresponsive to various types of stimuli, such as cold air, physical exertion, and chemicals. The airways become constricted, making breathing difficult. To diagnose asthma, a methacholine test is commonly used to determine whether a person is showing signs of airway hyperresponsiveness. Methacholine binds to what is known as the muscarinic receptors in the smooth muscle cell lining inside of the trachea. These muscle cells then begin to attract, causing constriction of the trachea. In a new study, the scientists show that the airway hyperresponsiveness induced by methacholine is due partly to the body's mast cells, which we knew that already. The research was conducted using a mouse model of asthma, where the mice were made allergic to house dust mites because the mast cells, when they're destabilized, release histamine, which causes inflammation and swelling. Mast cells, which are immune cells of a specific type belonging to the innate immune system, are found mainly in tissues that are in contact with the external environment, such as the airways and the skin. Because of the location and the fact that they have numerous different receptors capable of recognizing parts of foreign or pathogenic substances, they react quickly and become activated. In their cytoplasm, mast cells have storage capsules known as granules. They store histamine in granules, in which substances are stored in their active form. That's true. When the mast cell is activated, these substances can be rapidly released and provoke a physiological reaction. It plays a major part in the body's defense against pathogens, but in asthma and other diseases where the body starts reacting against harmless substances in the environment, it becomes a problem. Yes, because they overreact. In their study, the researchers were able to demonstrate that the mast cells contribute to airway hyperresponsiveness by having a receptor that recognizes methacholine, muscarinic receptor 3. When methacholine binds to M3, the mast cells release serotonin. Instead of histamine. Interesting. This then acts on nerve cells, which causes them to constrict, because serotonin is a constrictor. Yeah. Which in turn control the airways. Therefore, the airways produce acetylcholine, which acts on M3 in the smooth muscle cells to make the trachea contract even more. So there's a feedback loop. A vicious cycle is underway. Yep. Serotonin's a muscle contracture. It causes the smooth muscle cells in the trachea to contract and the alveoli in the lungs to contract. That releases acetylcholine, which further causes to contract, and then the person goes into a full-blown asthmatic attack. It's interesting. Scientists' discovery was also means that drugs like tiotropium, which are previously thought to work solely by blocking M3 in smooth muscle, are probably also efficacious because they prevent activation through M3 in mast cells. According to the ability of the mast cells to rapidly release serotonin responses to various stimuli, therefore contributing to airway hyperresponsiveness, has been underestimated. That's right, because it used to be thought to be histamine. That's a great, that's another lead. So asthma can be caused by mast stabilization releasing histamine. It can also be caused by mast stabilization release of serotonin. Serotonin's a muscle constrictor. Good find. Breast cancer, the risk of brominated flame retardants. Remember we used to drink Mountain Dew? Mountain Dew had brominated vegetable oil in it. It was to allow the citrus flavor in Mountain Dew to be suspended so you can get the full citrus flavor of Mountain Dew with every sip of your Mountain Dew. It had good old bromine in there. Of course, bromine being a halogen interferes with the intake and the absorption of iodine and is an endocrine disruptor of the endocrine system. And they've been putting brominant flame retardants in furniture, electronics, kitchenware, clothing. Brominated flame retardants are found in furniture, electronics, and kitchenware to slow the spread of flames in the event of a fire. However, it's been shown that these molecules may lead to early mammary gland development, which is linked to increased risk of breast cancer. Wow, so they cause early puberty in girls. Well, that's not good. The study on the subject of Professor Isabelle Plant from the Institut National de la Recherche Scientifique made the cover of the February issue of the Journal of Toxicological Sciences. Parts of the flame retardants are considered to be endocrine disruptors. They interfere with the hormonal system. These are not directly bound to the material which they're added. The molecules escape easily. They're found in the house, dust, air, and food. It's called a volatile organic compound at that point when it's in the air. Exposure can cause problems for the mammary glands because their development is highly regulated by hormones. BFRs pose a significant risk, particularly during sensitive periods from intrauterine life to puberty and during pregnancy. This is Professor Plant, co-director of the Intersectional Center of Endocrine Disruptor Analysis and environmental toxicologist. Endocrine disruptors such as BFRs can mimic hormones and cause cells to respond inappropriately. In their experiments, the research team exposed female rodents to a mixture of BFRs similar to that found in house dust prior to mating, during gestation, and during lactation. Biologists were able to observe the effects on the offspring at the 2 stages of development and on their mothers. In the pre-pubertal rats, the team noted early development of mammary glands. For pubescent rats, the results published in 2019 showed a deregulation of communication between cells. Similar consequences were observed in female genitors in 2017 study. All these effects are associated with increased risk of breast cancer. Professor Isabelle Plant points out the peaks in human exposure to BFRs have been observed in the early 2000s. Young women exposed to BFRs in utero and through breastfeeding are now in the early stages of fertility. Their mothers are in their 50s, a period for increased risk of breast cancer, says Professor Plant. This is why the team currently studying endocrine disruptors related to the predisposition of breast cancer, funded by the Breast Cancer Foundation and the Cancer Research Society. You might be able to counteract this by making sure your diet has significant iodine, so eating eggs and seafood. It might help. Of course, you want to limit your exposure to BFRs, obviously, or bromine in general, as an endocrine disruptor. But having adequate iodine might help. It might help your thyroid gland function better, and it may help clear bromine. Vitamin C also clears bromine, too, as well. So supplementation of vitamin C can help increase the excretion of bromine or bromide into the urine, be eliminated from the body. In all 3 studies, most of the effects were observed when subjects were exposed to the lowest dose from dust and not the higher doses. The observation raises questions about the current legislation for endocrine disruptors. To evaluate the safe dose, experts gave an increasing dose, and then when they observe an effect, identify it as the maximum dose. With endocrine disruptors, the long-term consequences would be caused by lower doses, reports Professor Plant. Although counterintuitive, this observation comes from the fact that higher doses trigger a toxic response in the cells. The body is exposed to lower doses so much the concentration of hormones in our body, the consequences rather consist in deregulation of the hormonal system. Yep. It goes from having a hormetic effect to a more damaging effect. And then there's a toxic effect. Probiotics increase gut bacteria diversity in extremely preterm infants. Extremely preterm infants can suffer from a life-threatening inflammation of the gut. A new clinical study has shown the supplements of a lactic acid bacteria may have positive effects by increasing the diversity of intestinal bacteria in the infants. The study has been led by researchers at Linköping University, Sweden, and published in the scientific journal Cell Reports Medicine. A liter of milk weighs a kilogram. Most infants who are born extremely premature weigh less than that. An infant who should have developed and grown for 3 months in a protective environment of the mother's womb is, of course, extremely vulnerable. As a consequence of advances in neonatal care, most premature infants survive, although 1 out of 4 of the extremely premature infants die. Preterm infants can be affected by very severe inflammation of the intestines, which almost occurs in such infants. The condition, necrotizing enterocolitis, or NEC, leads to parts of the intestine dying. Yeah, it's very tragic. 1 of the 3 infants who contract the infection die. And those who survive often suffer from long-term complications, such as short gut syndrome, because they have to have part of their small intestine removed, and neurodevelopment disabilities. It says Thomas Abramson, pediatrician at the neonatal intensive care unit at Crown Princess Victoria's Children's Hospital, associate professor of the Department of Biomedical and Clinical Sciences at Linköping University, who has led the study. The bacteria in the intestines of preterm infants differ from those in full-term infants. This has led many people to investigate whether giving probiotic supplements that contain certain bacteria has a positive effect. One finding is the lactic acid bacterium Lactobacillus reuteri can reduce the risk of NAC in preterm infants. Yes, and it's also a bacteria that is found in human breast milk. It can be cultured from human breast milk, too. It is, however, not clear whether this is true for extremely preterm infants, nor is the mechanism behind the positive effect known. A study now published as part of a clinical study carried out in Linköping and Stockholm The researchers looked at 132 infants who had been born extremely prematurely between week 23 and 28 of pregnancy, i.e. 17 to 12 weeks before the due date. All weighed to one of the two groups to receive oral drops that contained the probiotic or placebo. The treatment was given daily to the neonatal period. The scientists investigated how the intestinal bacterial flora was influenced by the supplement of L. reuteri and analyzed bacteria in the stool at several time points. We see the composition of bacteria in the intestine differs during the first month of probiotic treatment. During the first week of life, the bacteria group Staphylococcus and Klebsiella, which are both opportunistic and infectious, which may cause disease, were more common in the group that received the placebo. Says Magali Marty Gennaro, principal research in BKV and principal author of the article. Klebsiella can cause inflammation and has been associated with NAC and sepsis. The present study does not allow any conclusions about whether probiotic treatment influences the risk of these diseases in extremely premature infants. Larger studies will be required to determine this. The supplement of probiotic Lactobacillus reuteri, which would be in drops, and thus drops would be called from the brand BioGaia, survives in the intestine even though these extremely premature infants are treated with large doses of antibiotics to kill bacteria. The positive effect of this treatment is increasing the diversity of intestinal bacteria may be one mechanism behind the positive effects of the probiotics shown in the study, says Thomas Abramson. Supplementation with probiotics is used in increasing numbers in neonatal clinics. Scientific evidence that these supplements of probiotic for preterm infants have a positive effect that can be used safely is considered to be sufficiently strong. That's right. Of course, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a healthcare professional, but I'm someone very knowledgeable of natural health, conventional health, and in the gut. So, contact me for coaching. If you need any help, contact me. If you have a preterm child and you want to make their microbiome hopefully as good as possible. I was preterm myself. I was 3.5 months premature back in 1985. Probably had some effect on my microbiome. All right, everybody. Take care. See you soon.